What's up YouTube, Kronos here, and welcome back to another PSO2 video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about weapon choices. Specifically, the ray weapons have popped up into question. Now it's the 25th of June, this is the day after the Independence Day event has gone live, and the question begs, are ray weapons worth our time now? Well, it's fairly easy to farm them due to the event that's popped up. If you weren't aware, there's these new type of badges you can farm fairly easy called glory badges. They have a 1-for-1 trade value for the Rising Weapon badges too, meaning people are able to get the units substantially easier with this event itself. And now people are curious about, are the weapons worth our time? So I actually wanted to record this video to kind of talk about the weapons and something else that's been coming up a lot recently. Now, got a friend in the Discord that's probably going to think this video specifically because he asked about it, but to be honest, I've had a lot of DMs about these questions. I've had a lot of messages in the comments, things of that sort that people aren't always seeing, even though I'll harden comment them. So I didn't want to address this in a video because it has come up a couple of times. So we're going to talk about a couple of weapons. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the ray weapons. We're going to talk about the Gix weapons. I'm not going to touch on Mars, Titan, or Blade Revulsio. Blade Revulsio's more useful in the past, they're not that great. Aura weapons, I mean, just no. Titan Blazer, also not really. Mars, just to clarify, the SAF on this weapon does not work on other weapons. For this to be able to transfer over to other weapons, and when I say SAF, I mean special augment factor. For this to transfer over to other weapons, they also have to support this type of weapon. It's a super special ability. And other weapons right now in the game don't support it. So literally it's only useful for this one weapon. So it's not very good. But what we're going to talk about are the ray weapons, and we're actually going to touch on Gix weapons. So I get I don't say question, but I get the comment, well, you kind of trash Gix weapons. Gix weapons have their uses. They have, they're good weapons for how cheap they are. Now, first thing, as far as my recommendation is, just understand I am never going to recommend a weapon to a player with the guise of just be better at the video game forehead. Not everyone's goals are to be absolutely perfect at the game, and one of the things that Gix weapons punish is, I don't want to say poor play, but it does punish getting hit. It does punish dodging. It depends on the weapon category type, but at some point in time, taking damage, healing up, dodging an attack, something that has to do with some form of defensive, either recovery or action, usually causes the potential for Gix weapons to fall. Now, I did do a quick little calculation just so you guys are aware to see kind of how this works out. So just a little something on the side, nothing big, not too big of a deal, but I did want to talk about the Gix weapons because in a best case scenario, they're actually fairly strong. However, that's not going to apply to a large percentage of the people that are looking into this sort of thing. If you're playing at a top 2% level, you probably don't need me to tell you what weapon to use. You've already figured that out and you're moving on to what you want to do with yourself. However, if you're not, you probably don't want to get the answer, just play with this weapon and then get good at the game. And if you're not just getting good at the game, then I mean, it's your fault. Granted, yes, you do want to grow and become a better player. That's always what you want to be doing. However, my recommendations aren't going to be under the guise of you playing absolutely perfect every single time. But we'll talk about it and mention it since people have been, really kind of harping it down. We'll talk about it. So Gix weapons in a worst case scenario are going to be stuck with their 6% power that they actually get as a damage bonus. Now keep in mind, this is where it starts. So when you open and you go into a quest, you start at the 6% power base. Now this increases by 1 second over a course of 50 seconds to 20% power. Now granted, at that 20% power, Gix actually has quite a bit of stat. But in the case, we'll use Soaring Blades as our example since that's what I usually play mostly. In the case of Soaring Blades, the moment we take damage, we're back down to 6%. So any damage you take, it doesn't matter if you take 1 point of damage, 6%. And over the course of that 50 seconds, we're not at our 20% damage cap. So we're building damage over time. It does take 50 seconds, which isn't super terribly long, but it depends on really the quest you're doing. In some situations, it can be a relatively long time in a quest that you're only in for a minute and a half, depending upon what you're doing. Some situations, people get through quests relatively quickly, and you really don't get time. Sometimes you take damage from something small, like, the ground, the arena, whatever hitting you, you lose that damage buff. So it's not really feasible to say you're never going to take damage. Now, what the Gix weapon does do is offer you a ton of base stat, mostly for free. Now, where the merits behind this come is the price. Gix weapons, because they're not the best in slot weapon and everyone chases the best in slot, they're fairly cheap. One thing to keep in mind in PSO2 is there is a progression. Now, that progression is not hard locked. You don't have to go to one weapon before you move to the next. And one thing to keep in mind is if you're not playing as much as someone else is playing, your progression is not going to be the same as everyone else's. Meaning you getting to a certain point is not going to be the same as the guy next to you getting to that same point who's been playing more than you have been playing. For example, I've been through the Twin Orochis, I've been through the Nox weapons, I've been through the Milo Brights, because at the time while I was playing, they were useful to me. However, if I was jumping into the game right now, I would never touch these weapons with a 10-foot pole. I probably would have been sitting with these weapons for a little while. I most likely would have skipped these, I would have skipped these, I would have skipped this, I would have skipped all of these and moved right into one of these three. Just because that's what's available to me right now. That's the one thing you have to keep in mind is when you are playing the game, what is available to you and what do you actually need. Now, in most cases, a Nox weapon will actually carry you pretty far into the game, into the end game itself too. A fully ground plus 35 Nox weapon not only is useful as fodder to feed into your 13-star, it does do a decent chunk of damage. And as players, we are pretty strong in the game as it is. If you're sitting with full maxed out gear, in most cases, you're going to crush most of the content that's out if you're in a full group of 12 people. Full groups of 12 people with full maxed out gear crush all of the content. Meaning in most situations, you really don't need to be fully maxed out to be able to have a decent time in PSO2. If you're just a casual player, you're not playing nearly as much and you're trying to make your way through to get towards the better stuff, then sitting with a lower tier weapon, as long as you ground that weapon, as long as it's got a decent potential. Now granted, it's not the same for everyone. There are other weapons in other categories that are going to be better. So I highly recommend going through this website, seeing what you can gain access to, finding out how much it's going to cost you to actually grind that weapon up and use it, and then use it. Now, there's a reason why I stop at 12-star, because there is an innate bonus amount of money you're going to spend working with a 13-star weapon. Now, I always recommend using a weapon that is fully ground, at least plus 30. And I keep saying fully ground because on JP, you would grind a weapon, but technically it's enhancing, so I'll try to switch over to it. You have to forgive me for our terminology, but a fully enhanced weapon, you really want to push any of the weapons you're using to at least plus 30. Reason being is the potential is where you get get a good chunk of your damage from your weapon. That's why we're always looking at potentials. Potentials. That is why you'll see me skipping over Twilight. That's why you'll see me skipping over Cutting Snow, because these weapons don't have the greatest of potentials and have very, very low base power. They're not very strong. I mean, some of these potentials might be of use in certain situations. And I feel like some of these actually do work for some of the newer bosses that are coming. But the one thing to keep in mind is that if you were even thinking about going to either of these weapons, the weapon that I was like, hey, not really that great, I'd still recommend that over these choices, to be perfectly honest, just because of the base stat. Constant damage is what we're keeping in mind. Now, there are variables to keep in mind too, but constant damage is what we're keeping in mind here. So I know that a big portion of this video is going to be talking about these weapons here, but it does go back into ray weapons as well, and what we're going to talk about there, because that's actually a lot less of a conversation to have. But at the time of this video, I went through the market and just pulled up some prices for a couple of things. So I went and looked for the price of the Gix weapon, I went and looked for the price of Nemesis weapons, and I went and looked for the price of elemental transfers, as well as the cost of upgrading and grinding. So there is two methods for grinding. There's a couple methods actually for grinding, but two that I know personally are using 3 weapons plus great successes and getting your weapon to plus 30 that way, or using 5 weapons plus no great successes and getting your weapon up to plus 30 that way. Now, the plus 30 weapons they fluctuate for the 12 stars. The plus 30 12 stars right now are 1.4.5 mil roughly. I just rounded up to 1.5 because of course the market could fluctuate. And the plus 20 weapons are 900k. The problem is they kind of bounce back and forth between the two, and there's not really a middle ground for like plus 25s and plus 27s. So keep in mind that your mileage may vary if you're making your own or if you're buying them off of the market. Most people sell them at plus 20 and plus 30. They don't really sell them in between. If you're making them yourself, then that's something to keep in mind too. How much you're actually spending is not too big of a deal. But we're going to use rounded off numbers. Note that these might not be completely accurate, but there's something to keep in mind when you're looking at your weapon. So this is what I mentioned, why when you're looking at 13 stars, you're making an investment. The weapon's 1 mil, yes. But the cost to grind, you're looking at roughly around 5 mil, if not more. So just on what I was looking for beforehand, on the cost for three plus 30 weapons at 1.5 mil apiece, and the great success rates at 600k, you're looking at 6.7 mil. And if you were to buy the weapons you needed instead at the 5 lambdas used, now because these are a little bit more expensive than I'd like them to be, this method isn't as cheap as it could be. However, this will still ends up being a bit more expensive at 5 weapons, and at 5 weapons to use, meaning you use 5 lambda grinders, that's 6 mil to grind. So that doesn't mean that, yes, your Grix weapon is 1 mil, being light, but it does cost you around 6 to 7 mil of an investment to make. That's still pretty expensive when all things are considered. Now, Gix weapon, as far as its uses, it's a decent stat stick. It's going to make grinding that much easier for you. If you're really missing the damage, you need to be able to push more damage itself. And it actually has a good special ability factor. Its special ability factor is one thing that you can transfer from one weapon to the next if you use it as fodder. Now, granted, it does have to be plus 35, meaning you'll have to finish the grinding process for this. However, it is a decent special ability factor to use. It's one that you might use in the future. Sentence Might is pretty solid. And again, it changes depending upon the weapon type. The tech version of it is available, and so is the melee power version of it as well. Now, that does give it some longevity, but past that, there really isn't any. That's really all it gets. It doesn't have any other use outside of its special ability factor and just making it easier for you to grind. That's pretty much about it. Now, you can use it as fodder towards feeding into your 13 star to grind them up easier, but in most cases it ends up being overkill, and I usually still recommend using the 12 star method, but it is worth keeping in mind that is an option available to you. Now, what's the alternative? We're looking at Nemesis Weapons. So our Nemesis weapon that we looked for was about 7 mil. Now, one thing I've told people beforehand to keep in mind too is that double check the element. This Gix was the price for a light one. We looked at a price for any element Nemesis weapon. Now, the light Nemesis weapon was 10 mil. This one was 7, but element transitional was 2, meaning it was cheaper for us to buy the Nemesis weapon and the element transitional light, being a total of 9 mil. Then we take that, we slap on our cost here, and we're looking at about 14.7 mil. So what are you getting for that 14.7 mil investment, right? First off, you're getting best in slot weapon for right now. Now, granted, take this with a grain of salt, because episode 4 comes out in August. When episode 4 comes out, newer weapons are going to come out. When those newer weapons come out, they're going to be stronger than the Nemesis weapon. What's going to happen to your Nemesis weapon is you're going to set it aside alongside of a slave weapon and collect those for a 15 star later down the line. So yes, it does have uses later down the line. If you are a class that only uses one weapon primarily, mostly just looking at gunner, you do end up maybe not needing this 15 star. You can move to it if you want to get an early 15 star. If you're someone who's playing the game consistently, you play every single day, you've got nothing else you're really worried about, a Nemesis weapon isn't a bad thing. It's actually a pretty solid choice. But note that you can go into Gix if you just don't have what you need just yet, and you need that extra oomph. You want to make things a bit easier on you. You don't want to struggle as much while you're going through content. But if you're looking at the prices right now, the Gix weapon plus all of the grinds is almost half the cost of the Nemesis weapon. For a weapon that is a transitional weapon, you're going to transition into a Nemesis weapon anyway. Now, we don't know how long these weapons are going to be of use. We do know they're going to be one of the strongest weapons we'll have in all of episode 3. So I'm guessing at the very least, they're going to be strong enough going into August. But past that, you're probably just going to use these to grind out your 14 star weapons. And one thing to keep in mind is the 14 star weapons are RNG, unless they change something up. Now, granted, we did get a crest system in episode 5 for those episode 4 14 stars. That crest system basically was a token that was kind of difficult to farm, and we would get them from doing certain campaigns. We can then take those tokens and trade them in for a max plus 30 grind version of our 14 star. Now, it would be max element, but it would be max plus 30 grinds, meaning you did lose some damage on it. So it was nice, but it wasn't the best in the world. Now, there is kind of other weapons that are available that you might be able to buy to upgrade into, but again, there's a bit of RNG involved in that as well. So you're really going to be using this Nemesis weapon going into episode 4, and unless you're super, super lucky at the very get-go, it's going to be useful for you for a while. There's some other 13 stars that are notable, but it depends really on how much you're trying to upgrade based on what you have at the moment. So all of those things aside, what it comes down to is money. How much are you playing? How much money do you have to work with? If you feel like you're going to be able to grind up the money that you need in a reasonable amount of time and you're not hurting too terribly much with, like, say, a Nox weapon or something along those lines, stick to what you got. If you need that extra oomph and you're really not playing that much and you think to yourself, you know what, when those 15 stars come out, I'm really not going to jump to them anyway. I can grind out a different 15 star and I'll be able to get what I need. Then a Gix weapon might be for you. It's going to save you quite a bit of money. And if you're playing really, really well, you're still going to deal in almost as much damage. Nemesis does have also the added fact that whenever they have a barrier up, you have a reduce in PP cost. I can't really quantify how much more damage that's going to provide you. So I really didn't go into too much of how much that calculation is, but now you can kind of see an idea of everything I look at when I'm deciding on a weapon. Now, all that boils back down to ray weapons. So ray weapons do upgrade into Union. Union weapons are fairly strong, however, they are still technically weaker than these here. Remember correctly, the Union weapons end up being just below the Nemesis and the Slave weapons, and I believe they're either on par or even lower than the Gix weapons, so they don't end up being stronger. However, if you got the badges, if you have the extra capital to spend, again, keep in mind you're still spending money to upgrade them. You do need at least 2 of these, and they do have the merit of having Astral Soul. Astral Soul is one of the strongest souls you can get. It's an all-class soul that's fairly good for weapons later on. However, by the time you end up really using these in affixes, they're not that hard to farm. Meaning that if you're picking them up just because of Astral Soul, you're not going to use it for a while. And if you are using Astral Soul right now, you might be a little crazy. But if you're using Astral Soul right now and you know how to use it, then maybe you just have the money, so you don't even need to watch this video in the first place. Hopefully that straightens a couple of things out in why I recommend the weapons that I did and why I skip over the weapons that I do. Keep in mind that this entire process is progression. If you don't have the money for something, save up until you do. Do the best with what you can. Don't rush into a 13 star if you're going to be scraping and scrimping things together to be able to use that 13 star in the first place. Dropping all of your money at once isn't always the best decision to make because you may not be able to make that 13 star worth it. In some cases, when these 13 stars were actually useful, they weren't better than the 12 stars because they weren't upgraded enough. Fairly common, you see people running around with unupgraded 13 stars, and they're not better than their 12 stars. Just make sure that you're prepared for what you're doing and you understand exactly what you have access to. It's not always going to be a cut and dry answer for everyone. It depends on the individual player. But if you can afford them, go for them. Keep in mind your class also does matter too. Katanas and rods and I think what else is the other one? And rifles are way more expensive. Rods are like 20 mil, katanas are like 20 to 22 mil, and rifles are like 22 to like 25 mil. So that's something else to keep in mind in those cases. For some people, I would say, hey man, unless you got a friend that can help you out, maybe you should just chill with the Gix weapon for a while. Hopefully that helps you guys out. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to toss them in the comments below. Again, a like is much appreciated on this video. It does absolve you of half of your guilt from using that ad block. However, it also does make you feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. Subscribing is the other half and helps you keep up with the content. All that being completely free. Hopefully, we'll have more of these types of videos coming up relatively soon. I did want to get this one out as soon as I possibly could because I've had a lot of discussion about it recently. Anyway, thanks for hanging out through this entire video, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care. Peace out.